Come on, come on.
Camera, yeah, I mean, well,
Okay. Okay, you ready?
Okay, call to order the community finance committee meeting at 6:31 PM in the boardroom of Opera HS. Please call the roll.
Mr. Tony Arbogast,
Here.
Mr. Brian Briskman,
Here.
Mr. Kyle Davis,
Here.
Mr. Brian Adamhoff,
Here.
Dr. Gregory Johnson, Mr. Greg Holder, Dr. Michelle Manning.
Here.
Mr. Steve Miller, Dr. Kathleen Odell.
Here.
Mr. Bob Spatz.
Here.
Okay, Ms. Lopez, are there any public comments for tonight's meeting?
None.
Okay, then we can go to the approval of the minutes.
Before we start that, I'm sorry. I would like to also introduce two of our board student delegates. If you want to introduce yourself and tell me a little bit about yourself, go ahead. Turn it around.
Okay.
Get the mic.
Hi, I'm Isabella Crow. I'm a junior at this high school. I've just recently started going to the delegate and board meetings. Find it very interesting. So thank you for inviting me tonight.
My name is Tyson Reggae. I'm a freshman here. I really like the delegate program and I'm really excited to be here. Thank you.
Sorry.
Welcome. Okay, do we have a motion to approve the October 14th, 2025 Community Finance Committee meeting minutes as presented?
Motion.
Second. Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion.
If we could also recognize Mr. Miller tonight. Good evening, Mr. Miller. Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead. So,
Please beat me to it.
Oh, okay, great. Okay, so the first item on the agenda is a review of the CFC charter.
Okay, as we talked about last time, that do we have the correct membership numbers and who votes and who does not vote? It was recommended we bring the full charter forward for discussion here. If the committee then determines that a change to the charter is needed, it would be written up and then presented to the Board of Education for approval.
Okay, did you have recommendations?
It seems that not overly specific, the purpose and the charge seem to make a lot of sense in terms of what this committee does. It is the composition that I think, as much as I wanted to bring recommendations forward, based on some of the discussion that we had at our last meeting, thought would be better as a committee discussion as opposed to recommendation. Just to see who they felt comfortable with being voting members, who would then what would make up the quorum, yeah, so felt like that would be a good place to start.
Okay.
But also, if anybody felt there was updates needed to the charge and the purpose, then certainly that would be up for discussion as well.
Okay, so based on last meeting, we were talking about how there's currently 9 people who are listed in the charge. And that then meant that you could only meet, 2 people can only meet at one time outside of these meetings. So we weren't sure if that was really what we wanted, and also we wanted to clarify who are voting members So yeah, I'm gonna open up to the floor on that.
Right, I can start, that the way District 97 formed its committees, and that doesn't have to be a precedent for here, but we gave it a lot of thought. Back in 2007, when we formed our first Finance and Facilities Committee, is that the community members would be the only board, voting members, and that they chose to have 7 instead of 5, but you know, that's fairly minor for 3 reasons. One, that then didn't put the board members or the administration in the position of having to vote for a recommendation that they then might want to hear their colleagues provide some input, and particularly didn't want to put the administration in a position of potentially not aligning with the administration as a whole, because they may not have gotten a chance to talk to their colleagues and everything else. And their voice would be seen as, this is the administration's position, even if they qualified and said, well, this is my position, I still need to. Just getting those people who will have another chance to talk about the recommendation out of the original vote made a lot of sense. And then that also addressed several of the Open Meetings Act issues by making them non-members. You could have 2 community members talk to either a board member or administration member and not have it violate Open Meetings Act. And as I see how this potentially could be interpreted, 2 board members and Tony could talk to each other without violating the board open meeting, but they would in fact probably be in violation of the finance open meeting, which it makes no sense. You would have more restrictions for a finance committee. So my recommendation would be that the community members be voting members and the rest be, whatever you choose to call them, as well as we were talking about slightly before the meeting, is also adding the student as people who attend the meeting or could attend the meeting on a regular basis, but also would be non-voting members. So that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, it's funny, I've never seen this memo before, who the person I'd seen it. I'm assuming, Tony, this was something that, did the board actually vote on this back in 2021?
Yes.
Okay, right. And I think maybe because I hadn't seen this and I was so accustomed to the way we were operating in 97 along with Steve Miller, I think I just kind of assumed we were in the same mode. So this is great to look at this. And I like the idea also that only the 5 citizen members are truly the voting members, because that way it creates even more independence. And board interests or administration interests cannot dilute the objective, independent viewpoint of the committee. So I'm strongly with Bob on that point.
Your feelings?
I think one other benefit to the having the voting members be just the community members is that the way CFC serves as an advisory committee to the Board of Education, that means that we don't put board members in that kind of awkward spot of advising themselves. Where they they're like, they're here and they hear and they can participate in the conversations, but then I think we're more truly taking the voice of the committee to the board than when recommendations come forward.
Okay.
That's a shorter articulation of what I would say.
Okay, so just to summarize, would be the 5 community members would be the actual members of CFC, then the rest of the people who are currently, like as of right now, still members would be, are we calling them ex officio, like similar to Dr. Johnson?
That seems like it would be fine. Just make the student delegates members of the administration and board members ex officio members of the committee.
Okay,
Right, and I think for clarity of the charge, ex officio just means based on your office, it doesn't necessarily imply voting or non-voting. So it probably should be explicit that they are non-voting ex officio members. And you know, Tony is an ex officio member because he's here because of his job, but he's not here because he's Tony. Yeah.
Right.
And also there's a question of whether or not Brian should be listed in that as well as people that are expected to attend regularly or not. It could be, yeah, the discretion of the administration, or something like that, because they should to be able to invite whoever they want to come and present or something else, you know, just like, you know, Forecast 5 sometimes comes and Liz Hennessy, if she's still a bond agent, sometimes comes.
Okay, so can I get a motion?
Just, do we want to act on that first, or should we talk about all feedback on the charter first and then?
Oh, sure,
Yeah, I don't have anything else specifically in mind, but I think there may be other suggestions.
Thank you.
Your red mark.
Thank you for that tee up.
Might
Yeah, on page 2, it's got a bunch of different activities and responsibilities, and I agree with all of them. One thing that I noticed, the last one is CUC chair will provide an annual written report and will make a presentation to the board. I don't remember us getting such a thing.
But as the veteran person here since Greg's not, I do believe we did do the annual report for the first year or two. I believe the only time we went to a board meeting though was to talk towards the project funding that delivered like general annual report.
Right, the second to last bullet point falls into that weird category as well, where it's providing the board with a pre-quarterly written report, and my guess is those aren't being done. On the other hand, you could argue that the minutes should be included in some board packet and just sort of say, here's what the committee talked about. Could probably technically meet that, but those last 2 bullet points I saw as well as something that we may want to discuss and rewrite or rethink.
Yeah, so Kathleen and I, as part of our duties here, will turn around a report to the board about what was discussed. I don't think we forwarded the minutes, although that's something any board member can get into diligent and read if they wanted to. I guess the main question for the new 5 only voting members would be, or who here wants to sign up for the 50-page book report with the each year? I kind of like, I like the idea, and I think the rest of the board would like the idea of an annual presentation from the CFC. But I feels like the quarterly written reports is just extra easy work.
Does anybody know why it was in there to begin with?
It is not an unreasonable request to do, and when you first think about it, you want a formal way for things to get back up. And it's until you do it and realize that it's not going to get done on a regular basis, because I think it's possible some of our early drafts of some of our District 97 charges had that as well, and then it's like, yeah, this isn't happening on a regular basis. You want some mechanism for the board to be able to request, we would like a written report or a presentation from the committee about topic X. And you probably want some mechanism for the committee to make a recommendation to the board. We see something going on that we think we should present in person, but not have it be at a specific time because the calendars don't always align or anything else. So just sort of, yeah, almost the flexibility of the board at any time to request a presentation from the finance committee, and the finance committee can ask for a slot on the board agenda or something like that to make a formal presentation. Yeah, almost the same wording that was here before about if there's trends or something else, but instead of saying it must be annual, you say. If people are seeing trends or something they're concerned about, they can request it or something along that line.
What if we, as we begin to think about editing this memo, first thing I would do is turn these dashes to number. It feels like striking the second to the last bullet would make sense. And then perhaps on the very last bullet, change will to may in both the cases of written or presentation, just to make it just what else I think.
In terms of bullet points, newly numbered things. The dashboard, I don't think existed at the time this was created. And there might be something, although it's probably would be incorporated under adding transparency to communications, but you might want to call out, financial aspects of the dashboard should be reviewed or something like that. And then the other piece that I was seeing was that, blanking on. Just that, there probably should be something either in the charge or someplace else, to your point about the board representatives are expected to report back to the board because it's a board committee, that the onus shouldn't be on the administration to report back to the board. It should be the board, and I don't know if that's part of the charge or something else, but that I don't think there's a bullet point, particularly if you're dropping that quarterly report requirement, that should say it is board members who attend this responsibility to, forward to the whole board, whether they do or don't, that's a different question, but it seems like who it should be tasked to.
Does anybody know the Robert's rules well enough to know that if the CFC is a standing committee of the board, should the board not then formally receive the minutes? And potentially not approve them, but in my experience, normally if you have a subcommittee, you receive the minutes as part of the board agenda.
I don't know about Robert's rules, but other boards that I've served on, it's usually the representative reports back. So like the board rep reports back to the board because I don't think people are going to read the minutes. I mean, obviously they can, but it's more the way it worked was, the synopsis was given so that it was like the context of the board. That's what they thought was important. And so
Yeah.
Yeah, that was kind of my question, but do you have a board reports section of your agendas typically? Okay, yeah, my district does too, it seems like an update from either one of you in that one had been a CFC meeting would make sense.
Right, and also just even to your point about these minutes are available on public website, of just having an addendum at every report saying full minutes are available on the website. Just to remind people and just have it be a tag at the end of, or, if it's reports, CFC meeting, and then just have bullet point full minute, met on blah, full minutes available at this link. And then if they choose to click through it, whether it's the public or the board, you have clearly indicated it's there. As you said, I don't think there needs to be approval of it because there's no way for them to approve it if they haven't been at the meeting,
Yeah.
but that way it's making clear that minutes do exist and.
Well, Lisa did such a nice job of attaching a packet that includes the past minutes. And when I've done my report back to the board, I'll provide a written summary tied to the agenda. We just attach the packet.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, now, someone needs to take ownership of editing this memo, and then it needs to get turned into an item that hits the regular board meeting agenda.
So my thought here is I've been taking notes on the recommended changes. I'll type this up either tonight or tomorrow at the meeting. and then send it out to for review. And then we'll put it on for December discussion, and then it will go to approval at the December board meeting.
So you're willing to do a track change version of this and circulate that to at least me?
Yep.
Thank you, that's.
Okay, so then we are not voting on it today.
No, these are all, discussion, yeah.
Yeah.
Just to be clear, I think that track change version can go to the full committee, or should go to the full committee.
Yes.
So the Fab Five is signing on for.
But the full committee would need to approve the
Right.
change.
Yeah.
We don't want another cycle in which there. Will do something.
Just out of curiosity, is the strategic plan priority 4 still a relevant reference?
Yes.
Okay. You know, it's just one of those things to always check, and sometimes 4 or 5 years later, it's like, oh yeah, that's makes sense anymore.
And just so to clarify for everyone, we actually did not solve our 3-person problem because a committee of 5, you still need 3, because I just was doing it with meetings there. So you,
The difference is you can't have 3 committee members, 3 voting committee members, but you could still have 2 committee members and Tony, 2 committee members and Graham.
yeah, okay, I'm back with you, right,
Right.
okay, great.
Yeah, so
Committee
yeah,
members
you're
and
not,
Tony and Graham.
right, or you and Graham, right, you could have up to 6 people, you know, 2 from administration, 2 from the committee, and 2 from the board. And, yeah, potentially 2 from the high school.
Okay, and the other thing that I think there was mentioning the other meeting was just about and selfishly, like, what is the role of the co-chair? What did we want that to be?
And do you want to call co-chair or vice chair? You know,
Yeah, because we're not really treating it like a,
Right, it's always functioned as the vice chair, despite the title. You probably use the same wording from your board policy about the vice president, will assume the duties of the chair in their absence or something like that.
Yeah.
in fact, in the charge, co-chair is not mentioned at all. So that should probably be explicitly mentioned, and also. Okay, this specifically says the chair is elected by the committee. So, you know, whereas,
It says vice chair.
oh, it says vice chair, okay,
so I guess we're using.
I searched for co-chair, should have realized.
We used to use vice chair, when we started using co-chair? Whenever the tents were made, I guess.
And then I think Craig was also just separately, not during our meeting, talking about the terms. So I just wanted to confirm. So he did think it was 1 term. So, sorry, 1-year terms. And I thought I was signing up for 2-year terms. I don't know why.
So
Maybe I-
they are a series of 1-year terms that automatically renew. But I believe, and I'm speaking to my interpretation, the way I read it is that it was done to provide the community members flexibility if they didn't feel like they were meeting the duties of attendance or something like that. But the way I'm reading it is it's a series of 1-year terms for a maximum of 8 years.
I mean, it's fine with me. I just wanted to make sure I have that other information. Okay, any other comments? Just generally on this.
I just saw one more thing reading about the terms there. It does say that the committee may meet up to 6 times per year. So do we maybe want to take that out? Because we're talking about how frequently we would meet, and I think we have not more than that in years past.
know how many meetings we have scheduled?
I believe we're at 6 for this school year.
Cause in the last 2 years, we've only met 4 times
Yeah.
per year, and I was like, that looks great, we need 6 times.
Yeah, so what we can change that to is up to 6 times per year unless additional meetings are deemed necessary by the board or committee. So,
And probably should be specific about calendar year versus academic year.
Yep.
Yeah,
Because otherwise it's like, oh, which year are you talking? Like schools always assume academic year, but somehow other people don't.
But just to clarify, so for the terms thing, that would not count for one of the board members that is an ex officio member of the CFC?
correct.
And very importantly, when counted for the superintendent or the assistant superintendent, you know, you hit 8 limits, you can't come to 8 years, you can't come to this meeting anymore. So yes, no, that should be, that's yet another reason to have the voting committee members have a whole section, sort of like, yeah, here's their requirements, here's their term limits.
But it's a good question.
But no, that was a good one.
And for the information of the delegates, the way the board works is that every year we revisit the list of committee assignments and then decide who should remain on something or switch out.
And do financial advisory committee years count towards the 8 years? Like if someone served on the financial advisory committee?
You mean for a board member, for a board member's.
For like a member like of the public who wanted to like be a member of the CFC, like what they're, if they were on the financial advisory committee, would those years like count into their 8?
just because there's separate committees,
Yeah, there's
this is just like
separate
this charter.
And it wasn't continuous where one rolled right into the other either, it was a period between the two. I don't see anything here that specifically says the community members have to live within the district's boundaries. Need to add some qualifications along those
Oh.
lines.
Yeah, I would say that's, but. Otherwise, yeah,
It's been assumed,
Right.
but like if someone
yeah,
on the committee moved to, like a school board member, they would have to resign, that's.
yeah, great catch.
Yeah.
Since we're, going to vote on this next time, I think also you can send Tony something, just one way. And then we can talk about it, what we actually vote.
Sounds good.
Is that 2/3 of all meetings per term, either in person or virtually as well, but that's still the current standard? Or should that be, was that changed after COVID and not?
I do not believe it's been changed, but I do need to check on that before I can say with confidence.
Okay, I think they, since I just read it like an hour ago, I think they have to be in person.
Oh, okay.
Since COVID.
But you can attend virtually under certain.
Yeah, if there's a
You don't have
rules,
sports forum.
but you don't count. So that's another.
And one other thing that, again, since we're nitpicking about this, it's 1-year terms for 8 years, but they'll be staggered to maintain continuity of committee membership. That doesn't make any sense. If they were 2-year terms, you would want to stagger them. Since they're not 2-year terms, I don't know what the wording stagger.
Maybe they changed it.
I think the thing is they probably did change it or they copied it from some template or something else. And I was gonna say, just in general, what happens is you get a charge you're comfortable with, and we put it next to me. Start with that.
So it doesn't say here, but if someone was like a community member who was seeing they got elected to the board, would that make them an ex officio member or?
We actually just had that situation. And it's one that I think could be common practice is it's kind of a great way to get to learn about the district and the background of the district. Board member Odell had served as a community finance committee member for a number of years prior to her board service. Then when she was sworn into the board, she moved into a board role and that opened up a seat for us to review applications for the community finance committee.
And just for clarity, the board did not necessarily need to choose her to serve as the board ex officio member. They did, and in most cases, that would be absolutely the right thing to do, but that there's nothing saying that just because you served on the CFC, that your board role would be also on the CFC. And you know what your interests are and what the other board members' interests are and so forth, but you would certainly need to resign from the CFC at the point at which you're sworn in as a board member.
Okay, so do we need to be clear about that in here, or that's just assumed?
Probably in the definition of qualifications for committee members, it probably should list they are a resident, they're not a staff member or board member of District 200. I don't know, is there anything else standard to disqualify that would disqualify somebody?
I mean, there are people who live here who are staff members, so. It's
But you probably wouldn't want them to serve on this committee because you're potentially talking about. Yeah, it's just a conflict of interest that given the number of people in town and a 5-person committee, you know, you don't want to have to say, well, if you have this role, you could be a member. If you have this role, you couldn't be. You know, that just seems, you know, could the head of the faculty senate, if they lived in Oak Park, submit to join this? It just seems, you know, like conflict of interest or perception of conflict of interest. That, you know, unless you're desperate for people, I can't see why you would want to do it, or you could have not a staff member or board member unless voted on by the full board or something like that, to leave it open, but make it clear that at least that should be the first place you look for people.
Well, everyone was voted up by the full board.
That's true.
The committee, anyway. I guess I don't have an issue with it, it's all public meetings, it's not deliberating closed sessions that where I would see there be a conflict.
Sure. But probably at least should say board members can't have the dual role.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
perfect.
makes sense, yeah. Okay, any other comments? Okay, great. The next agenda item is 2025 tax levy update.
Yeah, and before I turn this over to Brian, I will set the stage. The board at our last meeting approved our tentative levy at this scenario 4 that was really crafted and created at this table. At our last meeting, here felt like an appropriate time to bring back just kind of conversations on what has changed in the last month, what work has been done. And then we also had board members that had reviewed our prior year UBF adequacy information. I can say internally, a couple of the things we've done that would fit not so much in the levy side and the revenue, but on the expense side, as we're looking at areas of efficiency. With our capital improvement plans, we've, as we had a number of bids that were out that we did as alternates, to not lock us into such a high number, but be able to look at what could reasonably be done this year. in those, what we found is there was a couple of classrooms that were going to be partially updated, but it was more of a timing than a need. But because we weren't doing a full classroom, we were just doing some ceilings and lighting. That was able to be postponed and not without bringing detriment necessarily to the room. But then will be reworked into our capital improvement plan when we do, when we can be a little bit more efficient, when we can do the ceilings and, excuse me, the ceilings and the flooring and everything together. We've also started a series of meetings internally with different administrators to review their individual budgets, looking for areas that we might have any inefficiencies, any redundancy in spending, looking at areas that if we're outsourcing anything that could be done in-house to save on those costs. And for initial conversations, we're finding those to be very productive. We found some potential savings with, I think, every one of these conversations that we've had. I think when I think through how we tackle reducing our costs, it tends to be when you do it in one big broad swipe of the brush, it can be painful. But if you attack the potential future deficits with kind of the theory of 1,000 paper cuts type approach, where a lot of little savings start to add up, you can do that in a very efficient way. I think we started that, just one example of savings this year is outside of these meetings and our board meetings. What we found is, we had several different online meeting systems. We had Zoom, Google Meets, Teams, and it was, well, why are we paying for all these Zoom licenses when we can do everything we're doing with those through Google Meets? So those have been pared down, and that was in this year's budget, but we're taking that approach to a lot of departments right now, and just seeing, what is the low hanging fruit, and then what can also then start to really add up. This has been, it's early. We're going into our negotiations with our faculty senate coming up, and just looking at areas that can be tightened up for some potential savings. But those negotiations have not kicked off yet, so we're unsure where those will land. And then Brian, I don't know if you want to add anything regarding the budget itself, or I'm sorry, the levy itself.
No, I don't have much to add, other than, last Thursday, the board approved the tentative levy, which is the one that gets published in the newspaper in advance of the public hearing. That tentative levy was based off of scenario 4, which, just as a refresher, was taking 1/3 of the available amount that we could take for recapture, so around $700,000, and adding that to the levy for 2025. So overall, the estimated levy increase is about 4.4%. And on December 4th, that will be coming back to the board for a vote for adoption, and the public hearing will also be held that same night.
Okay, Bob and I did meet to talk about some of the EVF stuff, and Tony said,
Are we done with levy?
oh, sorry, that's
Yeah, I apologize, it's we listed it as levy, but it's really a continuation of our last conversation of how the levy is, a tool, but not the entire solution to where we're at with our future budget projections. So it felt that these conversations will work kind of hand in hand together.
Yeah, the only comment I was going to make is that I think I did listen in to part of the conversation last Thursday. I think something that was overlooked is the fact that in option 4, there is requirement isn't quite the right word, but an expectation that there'll be 2.5, 3.2, and $5 million in reduction in expenses in the out years. There was concern raised by some of the board that there wasn't enough reduction. Yeah, that may be true that they want higher numbers, but it's not like what was proposed didn't have, 5% cut, in out years in expenses, which is a fairly significant cut. And I think that just, in looking at all these numbers, even though it's highlighted in yellow, I think got overlooked a little bit. It might be worth emphasizing is that this wasn't a status quo projection. It was a projection assuming 2.5 to 5% cuts over the next 3 or 4 years.
I think that's a good point, and also, the recovery, correct me if I'm wrong, Tony, but that amounts to approximately 0.8% total levy.
Yes, sorry, can that up, yes.
All right, and then, you've got for fiscal 27, about 400K of reductions or belt tightening, and then as Bob's pointing out, some additional, reductions and belt tightening beyond that. From my vantage point, 0.8% adjustment to the levy on the revenue side combined with half to a couple percentage points of spending reduction. What's important is that we're still maintaining ourselves between the yellow lines, so to speak. And that's normal. Districts do this all the time, is kind of attacking and driving, so to speak. What's important is, are we conforming to boundary conditions that are considered best practice for fiscal stewardship? Maintaining a fund balance between 25 and 50%. Staying right around the median or financial peer group in terms of operating expenses per pupil, and also salaries and benefits per pupil. So while this tackling and driving needs to occur, doesn't signal or indicate that district is in any kind of stress financially, but rather this is what districts typically do. Fine tuning from year to year, but still adhering to the right metrics and boundary conditions for sound fiscal governance.
Also, part of it is watching our investment. I would like for us to have a committee to do best practices for our construction projects. Project 1, not so good. Project 2, moving along a lot better. And we can make project 3 absolutely efficient, absolutely moving forward. I'll give you, for instance, the woman sat here and told us we had to borrow $50 million. We didn't need $50 million. She said it's easier to do 50 million than 25 million. Okay, as a package when she's putting the death certificates out there. And that's fine. We could have found somebody else, but we didn't, and that's fine. But we got the 50 million. Now we're paying interest and taking it less. That's the best practice issue. So, and then now interest rates have gotten lower. So how much will we have made? So these are the types of things in the best practice scenario. We just remember this. Remember what we did. So in project 3, when she's here, we tell her what we want instead of, I would listen to her presentation and it's great, but we tell her what we want and we're all smarter from it because this is our 3rd project. So we should be able to build houses and everything else. So I think, yeah, best practices committee, where we go over everything, dissect everything, the scope, schedule, budget, how was it changed in project 1, what happened, how did it go in project 2, and how we wanted to go in project 3.
I would agree with that. I mean, I think it goes back to some of the things that we talked about in previous meetings about other best practices that I think,
we should have,
yeah.
I think we should have
Beyond construction.
have them all in a book all the time, so we just have it with us. It's just with us. It's gonna be 50, 100 pages. We just have it with us. This is our 3rd big project, and I was talking to someone today, there is no company that focuses on schools, because the projects are too small. Our $100 million projects is big and kind of abnormal type of thing, but most school projects are 5 to 10 million, so you just have to find a construction company. Well, like Walsh and McHugh, they're not gonna come here for $10 million. Because they gotta come and haul all their stuff and things like that, so there's nobody focused on schools, so we have to learn all this ourselves as educated people. And I think that would help in the long run. Since Project 3, everyone, Tony, Brian, would be like, okay, we're doing this, that, and the other. And then everyone will have questions, like, what about this, what about that? We did this as best practices, we did this as best practices. So I think it's just a matter of making ourselves better. And then we put this book somewhere, make it our book of secrets. 30 years from now, when we're not here anymore, someone else is doing a construction project, they go and find this file or whatever it is, gets it implanted in their brain or whatever, and they say, hey, we need, this is a guideline. It's not the actual, things change, codes change, but this is a guideline. I think it's gonna help us out in there, yes.
I mean, I think there are like, D97 who's like pulling Andrews, there are some construction groups that are done, right?
Yes.
But I think more to your point is, IASBO, some of these groups that we don't have to like create everything ourselves, right?
Right.
There are actual standards and things that are out there and maybe haven't been adopted. So every time it seems like we have to like create,
the wheel,
yeah, and I think
and that's all smart.
yeah, and everyone, they are different districts, they have different priorities, they might be using. They're like, well, that's great, but we're gonna make this other decision. But I think I wanna just, support what you're saying, because I think we need to take a more long-term approach to this than I think we have in the past.
Thank you.
I would just want to take a bit of a contrary view. Is there still a district facility committee?
Yes,
But I just want to make sure we stay in our lane. Like, I would defer to them on decisions about the architects, the construction companies, general contractor versus construction manager, all of that sort of stuff. The conversation about borrowing and debt and all of that, that's our wheelhouse. But I want to make sure that the right experts are in the room evaluating some of that stuff, and maybe jointly then developing
Yes.
what you're talking about, Cal, as a resource to throw on the shelf and for future boards to do things.
I would also, since we're reviewing the charge, I just did a search, the charge has nothing about capital or bonding. At least not that I'm finding, it has something in the top. In part of the introduction says, with ongoing uncertainty about revenue sources and additional funding to support capital improvements. But in that bulleted list, there's nothing saying review bonding options, review. There's something about investment options, but again, not about bonding options.
There's a lot more money in the bank when this was written.
Oh, yeah, no,
It's not anticipated yet.
Absolutely, but I think
But
that,
it should be there for sure.
so that line item could be added, review bonding options or whatever else is the appropriate wording for that. I think that's a good catch that isn't officially part of the charge. It's sort of implied in there, but yeah. It's better to be explicit about that.
I feel like just looking at this here, I feel like there are some ways we can like reduce, if we were able just to like get feedback from like the staff and students, because I feel like there are a lot of things that the district pays for that people just don't use. Like honestly, I've never used my locker report, I couldn't tell you where it is. So I feel like it's things like that where if the CFC or the board was able to like go and see like what people are actually using, and then we could take some of that money and put into like reductions and also just like make the things that everybody uses better.
It's a great suggestion. And when we were talking about, who should be on this next, and like include or not include staff, it made me think like, well, how are we including staff? Feedback for this committee.
So I can say there generally has not been a lot of staff feedback. That said, if there was a staff member who also was a community member, generally what would happen is they schedule time to come in and meet with me, and then if those, if they had concerns or comments they wanted considered at the committee, that they would, I can bring those forward, or they are also always welcome to come make a public comment as well.
Maybe I'm remembering the old CFAC committee meetings, but I remember Sheila Lerner when she was the faculty senate chair being at the table and part of the group, it's maybe the makeup and representation was a little different with it. Maybe had a little more of a staff voice there. I feel like there was a non-rep folks to,
I think it's very important for pretty much rebuilding the school. I went to Nepal a long time ago, but they just bought where they are now, Jackson Estate, so Gold Lights building. And they refurbished the whole thing, went inside, one of the lecture halls held 150 kids. There were 3 big pillars in the middle of the room. So on the other side of the pillar, so 18 kids, because it was 6 kids, plus probably another 2 or 3, had blocked views. And it was a thing of, no one thought about that. I mean, we don't have that problem. These were like humongous pillars like during the century, and they're still there. They're still there till this day, but those are the type of things that once you do commissioning and you do significant completion, it's like you can't go back on these things. So it's a good point to have input from everyone before we start, but at the same time, cut it off when you cut it off, because then people start having wish list things, and that's when everything gets all expensive and scope changes and stuff.
Yeah, and I think like back to our charter, like, what's the purpose? Our purpose is, the finances, so staff, that's a different purpose for them, right? But when we do, because we are gonna have to get to reductions at some point. We'll have to maybe think about what is the best way so that everybody has a voice, doesn't necessarily have to come to us, right? But it should, maybe just think about what Dr. Johnson.
Definitely, and just a quick note, just because I'd be remiss if I did not give them credit in case they are watching. I will say, as we think through project 2, and I'm seeing it in project 3 now, our architects do a very good job of having focus groups of staff members from the building, so that generally is seen more with the facilities committee or at meetings, say with the Imagine Foundation, but they do a great job of hearing not just about the design, but the functionality of the spaces that are being created in order to make sure that we don't run into problems as Cal was mentioning. And then as we go to best practices, I believe we're starting to incorporate more of those in. Been very impressed with Gilbane as our construction manager. They've been a really good partner for us. But beyond project 2, what we did with them is use them to help with the estimation of cost for the long-term capital facilities plan. So it's not just what do we think in-house that work could cost in 5 or 6 years, but having that set of kind of expertise as a partner provide us, so when we're doing our projections, we feel confident in the numbers going forward. They're not just something that's put on paper.
Okay, so we're on the tax levy still. Anything specific to that before we sort of incorporate our feedback from the EBF? Okay. So last meeting, we talked about, the fact that, if we were the projections that you shared, you and Brian, that we're gonna have down the road, have to make some reductions in the spending category. And so in terms of, weighting, we thought that it would be better to take a look at the adequacy target gap analysis that you had previously done, because it's not gonna be that different, right? When you run it again, it's not like staff have moved all over or, added or subtracted a lot. So, as we go forward, you're talking, with them at the bargaining table and budgeting, that sort of thing, we did want to kind of be proactive in cuts, and what we might suggest. Not necessarily, we're not looking to vote on anything, but just start the conversation. So, you know, just as a reminder, the adequacy, the EBS formula is not just about resource allocation, but about connecting it to student achievement. And so the purpose or like foundation of it, right, is that all students can achieve to state standards, or at least 90%. That's like what the basis of the research is all about. And so you have all these different elements. And when we look at what Brian and Tony shared, there are some choices that were made, right, that don't align with the adequacy calculator. So we wanted to bring those to this committee. And, you know, if it's okay, there are, you know, it's sort of like a line by line situation, but I think it is important, you know. So does that work for everybody to sort of go forward that way?
Do you have a document or something?
Yeah, I don't know how to share on the. But it,
Brian, would it be possible for you to pull up last year's adequacy gap document and share your screen?
Sure, no, not a problem.
yeah, it's from the March 11th Community Finance Committee meeting, and then it's all the way down at the bottom is the PDF attachment.
So that's not whole.
Right, and why he's pulling that up, I think one of the things that we are going to need to talk about early in the process is EBF was never designed to represent 100% expenses.
Right.
That there are major elements that aren't included. And one of the things that is a first pass is making sure that staffing was assigned to the EBF accordingly, or in some cases, they shouldn't be assigned. For instance, food service is not part of the EBF at all. So any food service staff shouldn't be on the comparison thing. We have to account for them and say, yeah, this is something that we pay. But you can't say, well, you're spending over adequacy because you have X amount of food service staff, because the state is expecting you're going to cover your food service costs not through state funding, but through parent fees in the federal program. And there are a couple other things like that. Some of the high cost special ed are not EBF expenditures, because again, the money is supposed to be coming through mandated categoricals, which have a lot of federal funding. And so we sort of have to say, this staff is not supposed to be paid by this, so we can't say, oh, this is an elevated expense for special ed staff compared to what the EBF is saying, because in fact, some of these special ed staff are not an apples to apples comparison, and we just need to do a level of putting things into the buckets of, this is an EBF expense and this is what it goes against. This is not an EBF expense, and we need to account for it to make sure we're not spending too much, but the EBF is going to provide us any guidance. There are going to be some things that are gray between the two, and we need to have conversations about that for transparency with the community. And there are going to be things where District 200, specifically Oak Park Road Forest High School, categorizes things differently than the EBF, because the EBF model is based on the fact that you will have a prototypical 600-person high school. So it says we should have 5 principals. District 200 would be crazy to have 5 principals, but we have to figure out what they're being called on the other side and not say, oh, we're only spending 20% of our principal expenditure because we only have 1, and then saying we should have 5. Yeah, we just have to sort of say, what's an apples to apples comparison? Yeah, and again, it's not hard, but you can't, that default thing, for instance, it says you have 6 principals, and you go over and look and say, oh, we're only spending 20% of our principal money. It's like, no, we're spending more in something else. And we just need to make sure we call them, the department heads or something else. I'm not familiar enough with the staff to know what we're calling them. But we sort of have to create this mapping of, here's what EBF called it, here's what District 200 called it. Here are the things that need to be combined to have an apples to apples comparison. Because again, the default thing up there gives you some really quick and dirty information that is useful for a couple key components. But for some of the finer grain things will be more misleading than helpful. And again, our goal is to be transparent with the community and clearly communicate to the community. And if we're discussing and putting out a spreadsheet that in fact causes more confusion, that doesn't help anybody.
Yeah, and I think two other points. One is that, you're tying this to student test scores, both overall and in subcategories. And so if we were performing to a place where everybody was meeting standards, we wouldn't really have to talk about that, but that's not where we're at. So we do want to get into nitty gritty because of some of the more research-based strategies that might not be allocated currently. And the second thing is that if you go to the very last row, Brian, if we start with like sort of great, this blue row here, and it's showing that we are 112% over Earth at adequacy, right? So 12% over what the model calls for, but if you look at the very right cell in the blue row, it's 138% of the expenditures, and that just means that we pay our staff more salary and benefits than the model is modeling. So for tonight's conversation, we're gonna focus on the head count, the 112%. Because that's a separate conversation with the salary and benefits. We can get into that like another time.
And I think, to the point of breaking things down, there are parts of this that have headcounts. And there are parts, and I can't remember what percent of it, that don't include headcounts. For instance, like the central office and the superintendent and all that stuff are not specific headcounts, it's dollars per student. Operations and maintenance is dollars per student. It's not saying we should have 10 custodians or 20 custodians. Other things, particularly most of the certified staff, it sort of has a recommendation of staffing levels. But for other things, it doesn't have a recommendation of staffing levels. And again, to combine those apples and oranges things can get you a summary number, but I think it tends to be a little bit misleading and probably we have to figure out, again, not line item by line item that has 50 things, but here are 4 categories, certified staff that have headcounts, non-certified staff that have headcounts, and things that are per student, and probably focus on those 3 categories. Again, it's been a while since I've looked at it, but we need to figure out ways that you're sure you're not adding things together that shouldn't be added together.
Okay, so Brian, you wanna go back up to the top? My feet are just so small. Okay, the first row is called core teachers. This is for all the core subjects, meaning, math, science, English, that sort of thing. And so the way that, it is calculated, we're at 104% of the head count. So that right there is a really great thing because that is the foundation of, how our students are going to be learning to standards. So Bob and I don't have any, we're like plus or minus 5%, we don't need to talk about that, right? So that is really aligned with the evidence-based model. The next row is specialist teacher, that's also at 108%. So that one, if things get dire, you could cut slightly from specialists, but that's not gonna get you a ton of money, right? They are relatively spending in that category. The next,
Just some context, specialist teachers are your PE teachers,
yeah,
your art
music,
teachers, music. It's non-core certified staff that all students go to. Yeah. Specialists, we debated about that word for probably 3 hours. No one liked the term specialist because it got conflated with special ed and stuff, but that's what that is. That's your PE teachers, your art teachers, your music teachers, drama, debate, etc.
The next category is called instructional facilitator, and we looked, right, it's at 109%. But we looked at, who is assigned to this category in the background. And it's not exactly, meeting the definition. So instructional facilitators are supposed to be teachers who are providing professional development during the school day to other teachers. And so this is one of the biggest research-based strategies that you can use to improve instruction. And so I would say while the allocation might be sort of, within the range of the evidence-based model, I'm not sure we're accurately categorizing people. I don't think we have enough instructional facilitators here. So this would be one of my recommendations to bring to CFC that we would really recommend that they're using them in a way. I think some of this is who did we have? How did we do this before? Let's put them in, right? We gotta stick them somewhere. And I think, sometimes department chairs are doing that, but sometimes they're not doing that. Right, so that's more administration, like a department chair is really an administrator. They're not always doing this role.
And one other thing I would say too is that our role is not to say there should be more of or less of, but simply to say, here's what the model said there should be. Here's an area that you might want to look at. District 200 does not match the state on a lot of different demographic things. There may be very intentional reasons the board has said, we want more of X, or we want less of X, or the community really values art and music, and so therefore, we're going to have 10% more art and music teachers than the model calls for, and you just need to say, okay, where are we going to get the savings from? Same thing with instructional facilitators. But I think the goal of the comparison should just be to highlight where it differs from the model, where it's the same as the model. And then it's up to the administration and board to say, yep, we're doing that intentionally and that's great. Or, oh, we didn't realize that this was under best practice recommendations, or perhaps we're double best practice recommendations because we were addressing a problem 10 years ago that no longer exists.
Yeah, and I can provide an effect size chart also to go along with this for board discussion. So that, every little element is not gonna have the same effect on student test scores, right? So you might, if you make any changes, use that. Because, you want to be effective, in terms of if the goal is to improve student learning. Okay, the next row is called core intervention teachers, and it means tutors during the day. So it would be actual certified teachers providing tutors to students, either one-on-one or up to groups of 5. And that is another huge effect size, and we are at 54% of the model, and even the people who are in the background, the ones that have been put in this category, they're not necessarily doing that. They're not in terms of meeting the definition. So I think, Bob and I talked about how there's other groups, right, in Oak Park that have come to the board talking about equity. And I think this is a solution to some of that, providing real services to students who need it, struggling students. Core intervention teachers, this category is for, those tutors would be for anybody. So you don't have to have be a certain type of student, it's for everybody. Later in the model, you'll see there are ones for low income and ELL.
And also, this is another place where you might want to bundle things together and then decide, because You know, there's during school tutoring, there's after school tutoring, there's summer school tutoring. And you may want to slice and dice it different ways, but if you're spending. Basically have the right number of people, but the model's saying that more should be during school than after school. Again, that's one for the administration, the board to say. Is a very different situation than you don't have enough instructional supports anywhere. Is, again, just a different situation of, oh, there's not as many in school as we thought, or is the model called for something else? And some, to your point, Michelle, have different effect sizes.
That's what I was gonna say.
Right, the in-school certainly has one of the larger effect sizes, but then it also starts impacting what electives you can take and a few other things, and then that gets into, block scheduling versus regular scheduling and classes that are offered 2 days a week because you can't pull someone out for 1 or 2 days of tutoring and expect them to be successful in another class. So, some of it are not things that can be done without rethinking the school day. And again, it gets into administration and faculty and a bunch of other things, but just to highlight that this isn't a big effect size, but it's, either understaffed or overstaffed.
Yeah, so right now, it looks like we're categorizing 3 people as in-school certified teacher tutors. The next one is substitute teachers. It looks like we're at 94% for that category. School counselors are at 113%. Nurses, we're only at 68%. And then supervisory aides, we're at 258%. So I would say the current way that we're allocating resources is instead of giving students extra support, we're giving them supervision. These are like hall monitors essentially. These are like security.
Security doesn't have a line?
They don't have a separate line.
So again, this is one of these things where perhaps instead of putting security into supervisory aides, you put them into something saying the model doesn't cover this. And then, maybe you have the right number of supervisory aides, but for whatever reason, District 200 has decided they're going to put this into security, but the EBF has no money for security. Right or wrong, that's just the fact, and then the school, the board members and administration sort of have to say, is this something local tax dollars should be spent on, given that the state does not provide any direct funding?
The other, while we're on aides, so the EBF model does not provide instructional aides except for special education. So like, someone might need like a one-on-one aid, sort of. We, like a lot of other districts, are making a choice to provide instructional aides that's not like research-based. But it is often when you ask an adult, would you rather have 2 teachers? Would you rather have 3 teachers or 2 teachers with 2 aides? They are gonna pick 2 teachers with 2 aides, because it's like another adult. And so I think if we, you talk amongst yourselves in the school board, like every other district, are we going to just keep going with how we have historically done it, or are we going to use the research base to make decisions? Obviously that has to be Dr. Johnson and the principal and right? That's like Bob's saying, that's not our job, right? But I think for resource allocation, we're looking at the pie and you're spending 258% on supervisory aides, that's probably doesn't align with our priorities, like our values. So, which I think goes back to the charter to make sure that we have permission and, vision at the top of that. So that we're making all of our recommendations aligning with that. Any other questions on supervisory aides?
So I just want to confirm, so you said that that 42.6 headcount includes the security staff.
Yeah, in the background, so, those are, a lot of the people that are those 42 people. It's not everybody, I think it might have been, I didn't count it up, but it was.
Again, we just need to, before discussing this in any level of detail,
Yeah.
go through and categorize things into, this is where it should map to, we're 100% sure this is great. And again, I think there are some things that are up on there that are making the numbers look high, that are in fact not EBF expenditures. And we just have to be clear about those programs that aren't EBF expenditures. The obvious one is food. I don't know if there's any staff associated with transportation, but that's another one where EBF model doesn't cover transportation. So if there's any staff related to transportation, any O&M expenses related to transportation, those have to be pulled out because transportation gets reimbursed through a different mechanism. And special ed is probably the biggest line item where I think there's a high likelihood that there are some things on this chart that are special ed functions that are reimbursed through the mandated categoricals and not through EBF, and we just need to tease those out to make sure that we're presenting a fair comparison.
There's some other like testing, center, support, but the vast majority, I don't know, I would guess 80% are safety and support officers. Okay, so librarians were only at 36%. The model calls for 1 librarian for every 600 students, so I don't know the reason behind that, but that's a difference from the model, and then librarian aides were only at 18%. So.
And again, those may be in other buckets, or the same functions that a library and library aide would provide in a 600-person school. Maybe some of these supervisory things, because, if you have a library in a 600-person school, people go there, when I went here, I went to the library during my study hall. Yeah, and it was quieter and nicer, but and so that's one where, again, is the function of a library in a 3,200 person, 3,400 person school materially different, especially in this day and age where you carry your library with you enough that those functions are, like staffing to someplace else.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
People still go in their study halls now, if they're allowed to. And a lot of people go in the mornings if they come early, because you're not allowed to be in hallways for a lot of time. So I'd say maybe book loaning is not as common now, but definitely still going to the library is very common, and there's like staff to scan you in now that ID usage is becoming more prevalent here. So there's definitely still a need for the library and staff there.
Also, I think I'd just like to add for the overall model, I feel like, I don't know if it's really accounted for that, even though it is a high school where it's not like middle school and elementary school where you have to go. Once you turn 16, you don't really have to go, so I feel like we're measuring for student proficiency, but some students simply don't care. So I feel like it's hard if you're lumping in people who don't care with people who just genuinely don't get it. I feel like all their numbers will be mixed in the same pot, and it's hard to differentiate who actually is trying and because we have the resources here if you need help, but if you don't, it's just about wanting help.
I've heard some of that, and so some of that is sort of also implementation of how you get connected, right? Because maybe you don't want to feel othered, or maybe who knows what the reason is, right? That you might not want help, but they're still, they still deserve, right, to learn, and we have to figure out how to help them. But, thank you.
Right, and then to that point is, perhaps you need more an outreach staff. Because until you do the outreach to them to get them to sign up for it, you can have 5 tutors sitting around ready to help them, and if they're not showing up, the tutor isn't what you need. Yeah, and so there's some of that as well, and again, that's not for us to recommend, other than to say, again, we shouldn't be making any recommendations on what should be done, just simply, here's where there are differences from the model, here are the effect sizes from the model, and do some of that translation that we have the capacity to do. As I mentioned, last time is this is sort of a high priority for a finance committee to look at, given everything else that's going on in the schools. It's not always the highest priority for the school to be looking at, for the administration to be looking at. Whereas this can be one of our higher priorities for several meetings. The school board couldn't possibly spend half of 2 or 3 meetings talking about DBF. You have too many other things you need to do. Having been on that side of the table, and so there's that aspect of it too. Who has the time to focus on, doing the deep enough dive that they can report it with enough analysis.
No, but this is perfect thing for Tony, is he's meeting with colleagues throughout the building in different administrative roles to be looking at the specific areas that apply to them and having those conversations that
Do we have, Tony, sort of the discussion of this from last time? I mean, I saw Lisa had sent like this as part of CFC, but in terms of the board or administration, just so we have context of how this was decided.
I decided is in terms of like.
Allocations and of the different elements.
I believe there would be video of prior meetings that could be watched, otherwise it would be in prior minutes. But I think much of the discussion, and it's, this is an exciting conversation. I won't lie, I've been texting Brian a couple times and some ideas I've already had. We're looking at it, proactively instead of reactionary. And that's something new to this committee, and it's exciting.
I wasn't sure because I'm into it, so I wasn't like, is it just?
And just quickly to piggyback on what Tony said about proactive, is where this can be most useful is if some of this can be done before February, March, as the staffing budget is put together, to review it in June, after you've already hired everyone for the next fiscal year, it's not as useful. So that I think also is a priority timing issue. So our next meeting is in January. That if in January we can dig into this more, and then, provide some areas for the administration to research, and they'll even have to report back to us, but just report back to the board and say, here are 4 line items where there was the biggest discrepancy, either underspending or overstaffing or understaffing or whatever. Or you decide the direction you give them.
And I should rephrase what I just said, because I don't want to make it seem like we're just reacting to this. It is used as a tool then that brings, as human resources brings forward the staffing recommendations for adding or subtracting staff for the next year. But this is the first time we've really kind of looked at it, okay, now that we've made that decision, but before we do the next look forward. So it definitely is a new piece for this committee.
The next 2 rows are principal and assistant principal. So those together are 11 positions and we have 9. So while Bob mentioned we look like we're at 18% of principal, we're at 145 of assistant principal. That's meant to like be together. So, that's pretty similar, we're actually, under by 2. And I think that is also, you know, sometimes in the media it gets like overblown, like, oh, it's just, you know, administrative load, that's not actually usually what the problem is with, if there's some finances that are sort of off. Okay, school site staff, this one is, also way off, so of the model, it doesn't mean it's way off for what we need, but for discussion, it's at 236%. So this is supposed to be for office, like a, you know, secretarial, that sort of thing, so I think again, if we're overspending in this, then you can see where we're underspending, and is that in alignment with our values?
The tricky part of that, is we want to make sure we're only picking up the people that are doing really school-based roles and not district level based, which is a little harder to do in one of the districts.
Yeah, and I would say this is a line that I think we'll definitely have to note as we bring forward next year's numbers, because it'll look like, you know, there's a potential drastic change. But in who is in this bucket, I think we'll have to do a kind of a deep dive into you know, pulling out, because off the top of my head, I believe, you know, this is where we've got you know, our tax staff that's in the building, and our food service and transportation. So I think we have people here that probably need to be backed out.
Okay.
Yeah, I would think it would just be division secretaries, attendance office, and some of those, you know, more school-based things and that, yeah. A lot of good.
And then it's sort of, we're gonna jump over the per student investments, we'll come back to that. We go down to the, to stay on staff, to the additional investments, which are additional staff for low income and EL students. So in the model, there are additional intervention teachers, which again means the tutors who are certified staff that are working with students during the day. It looks like we would get 3 people in the model, but we don't have any here. So I'm not sure if, you know, that's just something to discuss with the administration, maybe it's miscategorized, but also sort of, you know, I asked Tony in between meetings for the annual spend plan, and I think some of this, we're looking at like the subcategories of, you know, how students are performing, and one of the subcategories are low income. Are we actually being deliberate, and like, what is the plan there? If it's not this, is there some other thing, right? And this is really, these you have to show that they're used for that. The other ones are just like, it's a bucket because we're like a tier 4, so we're not really actually getting it much money, but these you have to show that you're using them for the specified purpose. Pupil support staff, there's we're at 361%. I think it's just because we have so many different counselors, social workers, that sort of thing. That's where these roles got placed. But they are again supposed to be for low income students. So I'm not, I think it's just sort of like a conversation starter, right? This is the beginning.
And I'd have to, I'm speaking from memory, and so I would need to double check this, but I believe since this is last year's numbers, there were some positions that were being funded in this category through the COVID grant dollars that have then since expired, and this number has been reduced this year.
I think one other thing that's important to note, and again, we'll have to figure out as a finance committee how to present this to the public in a clearer way when a written document that goes up on the website is done, is the low income number that is used for the EBF is the DHS, Department of Health and
Human Services?
Human Services, Department of Human Services calculation of the number of low income people in the district. And it's like at 9 or 10% in the EBF. In state report card, low income is reported by the number of people who qualify for free and reduced lunch. which is up at like 19 or 20%. And so, and I talked to someone who worked a lot on the EBF, and he said there are very few districts that have that kind of spread between those two numbers. Oak Park happens to be one of them. And so when we're calculating the number of people who potentially need more tutoring, it might make sense for us to use the free and reduced lunch calculation, even though the EBF says, we use the DHS number, and there are a couple places like that where District 200 is enough different from the state that you sort of have to say, not so much take the state number with a grain of salt, but this is supposed to work across 850 school districts. There's going to be anomalies. You footnote the anomaly, you make sure people understand it, and you make the best decision based on your actual population. Another thing that was discussed about the low income piece as well is that K-12 districts, because they have the kids the whole time, tend to have slightly different demographics of low income, but some of the kids who were low income in K-8, their families are no longer low income now that they're in high school, but they perhaps need more supports because they had some risk factors earlier. And so there's some things with being both a high school district and being in where Oak Park is demographically, where we have to, the board and the administration has to be particularly cautious with the low income numbers in any of those calculations. And perhaps you do one calculation based on DHS and one based on free and reduced lunch and say, well, if you're between these two, you're probably in the right place or something else. Again, I'm not sure what the right comparison is. But to solely look at the DHS number, I think is going to probably make our investment lower than what I think the board would argue it should be, and the administration probably argue.
I mean, you can look, there's a lot of different, you can look at the feeders, schools, right, the feeder districts, and there's also a difference between when you're, some people might not want to report, right? So anyway, it's like very nuanced. There's a lot of meetings that happened on this.
Right. And again, for most districts, on average, it just sort of washes out. District 200, for whatever reason, is somewhat of an anomaly on these two particular things. And also that very quickly as a segue goes into why the peer districts were as complicated as they were to get, because we use the EBF poverty number instead of the DHS, or instead of the free and reduced lunch. And so that drops some people out of the comparison that had previously been in. And so that may be something, I hadn't realized the two were that different when we were talking about the peer districts. And that may be something, in the criteria that wants to be relooked at.
Most other states use free and reduced percentage. But that's hotly debated. So in this category, besides that, the intervention teachers and pupil support, there's extended day teachers, which means certified teachers who teach outside either before or after school. This is during the school year, which is at 0%. So I don't know if that is actually accurate. And then summer school teachers were also at 0. And I mean, so I don't know. We have a ton of summer school teachers, so I don't know. So that needs to be kind of looked at. And then
my thinking here is in the coordination with human resources as we put these together. And again, this is more what I'm thinking happened in here. The definition is because our summer school staff is also our gen ed staff. The thought was probably not putting them there in fear that then we'd be double counting our staff ratios.
Yeah.
But in hearing this conversation, hearing there's a different philosophy to it. So this is something I think we can more accurately reflect as we complete it for the current year.
And again, perhaps they get combined and report out as a total number And then you subdivide on the other end, because it's not like a student who is $1 over the poverty level needs materially less help than someone who is $1 under the poverty level. And so, yes, you need some number to calculate the EBF off of. But again, it was supposed to be an aggregate number of kids at risk, not saying everyone who's low income needs tutoring, everyone who's not low income doesn't need tutoring. Actually, it's a ratio, it's not 100%, but whatever, that, it was just a way to calculate an approximate number of tutors that the school needed from available data. The number of students who need tutoring, the high school should have a much better sense of who needs tutoring than the state formula, let's put it that way.
The next section is English language learners. So they were also, we don't have any intervention teachers, and that means tutors during the day for students. We do have pupil support staff, and this is at 833%. So I don't think that's, it's only 3 people, so maybe it's just, I'm not really sure, but that could be looked at. And then there weren't any extended day teachers or summer school teachers. But we do have 178% of English learner core teachers for during the day. So just something to look at and think about for our students who are English language learners. And then the final staffing category is around special education. So we have special education tutors, we're at 205%. Special education instructional assistants, we're at 188%. Psychologists, we're at 152%. And when we looked at the background staffing, there are other special ed roles that are not in these 3 rows. So we're actually like even more over than showing.
Right, but again, many of the special education roles are not part of EBF.
For the low incidence, high, yeah. And then the final part is all those per student amounts instead of staffing numbers. So gifted, we're at $0. So I guess that's just something to discuss with administration, maybe.
I believe, and this is a little bit out of my particular lane. I believe it's because we don't have a traditional gifted program here. We have that AP for all, so it just the educational model difference accounts for that. Is where I believe that difference comes in.
Professional development, we're at 106% of the dollar amount. Instructional materials, we're at 137%. Assessments, we're at 359%. Computer technical equipment, we're at 178. Student activities, we're at 90%, which seems like, I don't know. if that's right.
covers everything else.
Then maintenance and operation, we're at 96%, central office, 102%, and employee benefits, 144%. So, I hope that, Bob and I just wanted to start the conversation, really like highlight that there are, those effects side rows that I think we could probably do some resource reallocation. And then like our, student delegates have said, ask students, ask staff, and have administration ultimately make decisions. But overall, I think for this committee, starting with the blue row at the end, that is under our purview. We should, if we need to be making cuts, I think, this is a really good model to use. So thinking about it proactively would be the way to go.
Right, one of the other things I want to look at is comparing that with the budget that was submitted to the state. And identifying which buckets of money are not included. Because, this is 52 million. The budget's like 80 or 90 operating, 90 something.
Yeah, or just around 96 million.
Right, so there's a whole bunch of things that are intentionally not in here, but that should also be transparent. Because, perhaps the cuts could come from the things that aren't part of the EBF as opposed to things that are from the EBF, but that if you don't look at the whole pie, you don't know where you should be focusing your energy on. And again, there's always sort of the 80-20 rule. Could you make a big cut to something that's 2% of the budget? Probably. Is it going to have a material effect on anything? Probably not. And so in terms of prioritization, we also, at the January meeting, hopefully can get some sense from the community members and the board and administration that are here of what are the areas that are are higher priority to dig into more before the budget cycle starts, and which ones wait for year two.
Yeah.
Because you can't dig into everything at once, you'll get nothing done.
So is this our January post levy assignment? This subject?
Yeah, my thought here is that, we've talked about that the first look at the financial projections came up, in the budget and then now with the levy. And we've talked about, how do we find that balance of revenue and expenses to solve the problem and not, lean too heavily on, we're just gonna, it's all gonna be solved with revenue. I think this is a great reflection on, some of the more impactful areas of spending and are we taking the dollars now that we're looking at efficiency and putting them in the right place?
Okay, great. If we can all have an updated copy for the next meeting, actually before the next meeting, so we can all mark it up because
It won't be before the next meeting, but the
Okay.
next update of this comes when we do it in February.
February. Okay, because some things like sports, it's the whole girls thing.
Title IX.
Yeah, the girl thing keeps sports teams from being here. So everything's in intramurals. Because I serve on a committee that supports intramurals. So, that's why that is, and then security guards and things like, everything has got some sort of a reason, nuance to it. And it'd be cool if we could all have our own little spreadsheets and we just sit there and mark it all up. And then when we come here, and our nice hot food is waiting for us, because we're gonna be here 3 hours. And we just go right through it and we knock it all out. Hot food, please.
Right, I think, what we potentially could do before the next meeting is we can't do the detailed staffing, as Tony said, that would be till February. But I think we probably could create some pie charts or some other charts of which buckets of money are in the EBF, which buckets of money aren't in the EBF, which buckets of money are gray. And a comparison, at a very macro level, again, to try to get some prioritization. And potentially because we do have the numbers from 2025 and they haven't changed that much, we may be able to identify 2, 3, 4 comparisons where we say, which is the priority for us to dig in, for the committee to dig into, between the January meeting and what's the meeting after January?
February.
February?
Oh, boy.
No, April.
April.
Yeah.
Oh, we're not gonna get this done then.
Can I just, from a 50,000 foot view, make a couple observations? So the EDF, the board gets this same thing, and we do a talk through, and it's available on Board Book now, if somebody wanted to look at it. What's exciting about this, if you roll back 2 or 3 meetings ago, I said, wouldn't it be great if CFC was identifying and driving initiatives and leading sub-teams to run those initiatives. And sure enough, we have Bob and Michelle here on this EDF gap analysis. And I'm astounded at the progress you've made since the decision to commit to that. And what's interesting is, if you go back to page 1 of the August 2021 charter, there's the first bullet on purpose said, expect to examine financial performance holistically, as well as consider the impact of financial decisions on D200's vision and strategy. When I first read that, I thought, oh, that's an overreach. We really want them to, drill into or reconcile finance with the vision and strategy. But in fact, I think it actually makes a lot of sense, because this initiative, this gap analysis, makes that connection between our finances and academic performance and the goal of addressing the opportunity gap in a way that has never been done before, certainly CFC's never done this before. In terms of what you've done here now is you've kind of walked us through between 10 and 20 of the row items here in the EDF model with a kind of a verbal description. I think we're really going to need a document. And that document is probably going to need an executive summary, because of the 20 or so line items, what are the 5 or 6 that are most important and impactful here. I envision the sub-team of Bob and Michelle continuing in this work, because it seems to me that once you create a rough document, whether that's slides or a Word document, I'm just sort of anticipating what Greg Johnson might say if he was here. It probably would make sense for you two to meet with Greg, and potentially he would bring Jen Hester to that. Because everything you're describing here touches things like staffing strategy, resource deployment, and even organization design. So it's not just merely when the budget cycle goes around in the spring, but this starts to unpack how are we doing it, what kind of roles, what kind of expertise. And I think after that conversation occurs with the Greg and Jen, that there'd be a refinement to your analysis. And then I think the board would be ready and excited to hear this. What do you think?
Yeah.
So to me, it's less a case of, okay, let's wait till the January meeting to next have this committee do the next pick apart. It feels like you've made enough progress here that you do these couple of follow-on steps. By the time January comes around, might be ready to actually go to the board. That's this is exciting stuff. I think you keep going, but I know that to just keep my own bearings around it, I'm gonna need a kind of document.
Sure, yeah, I mean, we can definitely do that, and we could do it very easily, I don't know when you guys meet next, but I don't really think it has to be January. Because there's all these documents are on ISB's website of, like the definitions, right? And we can put them together for you, so you don't have to go looking for them. But the priorities of, spending in the effect size category, that would be the recommendation.
Yeah, and I'm talking specifically about what are the key takeaways of Bob and Michelle's analysis. And that could be just like a 2-pager. And then the other stuff you just mentioned are kind of like the supporting materials. That's what I thought. So I'm glad to hear you say, oh, that would be easy. I'm always nervous about saying, well, why don't we take the project?
I think one thing that I'm thinking about is if we're going to use this type of gap analysis more seriously and more deliberately to make bigger decisions, then it sounds like we would need to do kind of a deep dive on who's in which category, just to make sure, before we start to use the numbers in any kind of serious way, we need to make sure that the gap analysis document accurately reflects the situation within the school. And it sounds like it's close, but maybe, there might be just some fine tuning around the edges that will be necessary before we start to use it.
Right, and potentially that can be done off the 2025, where
Yeah.
Tony has already sent us the detailed list of who ended up in which categories. So, again, you do it preliminarily based on the 2025 and then refresh it for 2026.
And we've talked with Brian about some of the way people are categorized right now. And it makes sense, just want to have the pie, right? So in order to have the 100%, some of them are in some categories that make sense, but that's easily done as well.
And I think one of the other things that's a lower priority, but as part of this transparency, is looking at the revenue side of the EDF as well, and how Old Park stacks up on the revenue side. Just again, as a comparison. In some cases, we take in more than they expect, but in other cases, they are giving us less money than their model says they should. And so that needs to be transparent with the community as well. They modified the model to specifically not show a deficit for districts like 200, but there's two different adequacy numbers calculated for District 200, and I think it's important to explain both of those to the public. Because one of them shows the state should be giving us it's about 10 million more. Maybe that's just, I said, I can't remember between the two. But that should be transparent as well. And that because CPS is $1 billion under, we're going to be low priority to get some of the new dollars, but it doesn't mean that even by the state's own calculation, potentially there should be more state dollars flowing to District 200. Definitely there should be more flowing to District 7. I think there should be District 200. And knowing that is a shortfall, and part of the reason why the property taxes here are as high as they are is because the state is underfunding its own definition of obligation, is an important thing to make sure it gets communicated.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
all right.
That's good.
Our last agenda item is dashboard review, in terms of what we'll be discussing.
This is just, you could have been under information. What I did is I took the charts, from our, dashboard updates, put it into what it may look like on the website, and this is not live, this is just a mock-up, but, just a quick layout of what the, now that we're updated with the most recent numbers that we could get, what the dashboard may look like, when it goes live.
Great, thank you. We'll see that
Thanks.
progress.
And one of the things potentially, not in the next 6 months, but potentially in the next year, is there might be 2 more graphs or 3 more graphs that are related to EBF. A pie chart of what percent of our expenditures are EBF, what percent are mandated categoricals, what percent are other, what percent are something else, and then potentially, where blowing up the part that's EBF, how we compare to EBF. And then the other piece is how we compare on the mandated categoricals. One of the big mandated categoricals are transportation, certain types of special ed.
Most special ed is in India,
Right. But there's chunks that are still outside of it, and
just the private facility.
right. And there were 4 components mandated.
I mean, there's separate early childhood and bilingual funding, but those,
Early childhood.
I would typically consider those as maybe kids.
Okay.
Maybe driver's ed.
Oh, driver's ed is what Brian said.
Okay, yeah, that's gonna be, yeah.
That's definitely not an EBF.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I think it is important, I can look also at what we had in the transparency policy from G97 as to what we had planned to share with the public, because some of this is also just like, where you're doing interpretation, you know, everybody doesn't need all these like the details, right? It's just like, what's the high level? Okay, anything else on dashboard review? Okay, the last agenda item before future next steps is quarterly review of investment portfolio.
And this is added per request as an information item. The most recent holdings are listed. And then if this is something we'd like to discuss more in depth, we're due to have our investment representatives come out and talk to us about our portfolio. So that's something we can bring forward in one of the next couple meetings as well.
Thank you.
Do they call us or do we call them?
To come to the meeting, or
Just in general?
I'd say a little bit of both. We hear from them quite often. We're both, whether it's a phone call or direct email, as well as current market offerings or anything new that pops up. And then we also will reach out if we have questions or, you know, see an opportunity, so.
Okay.
Okay, future agenda items, next steps. Sounds like for January, we are going to be, we have an action item to vote on a revision, the language of our charter.
Would that potentially be done by the board before January? Is there any reason for it to come back to you?
I don't think so. I think a good board could adopt it. I think I'd want to at least get some kind of signal from CSC members though, before we just go off. And do that. Meaning that there's buy-in to the track change version.
Yeah, what I'll do is I'll make those changes and we can circulate it. What I would ask is that just in following open meetings act rules, do not reply all, send any feedback to myself, and then I can forward it over to our board members. And then if it looks like we can then discuss and see if there's a you know, an agreement or a consensus that comes around, then we can bring it forward to the board. If we feel like, no, we're not on the same page, we need to bring it back for discussion, then we can do that in January and bring it to the board in February. The only benefit of having the board adopted ahead of time was in those couple months, it sounds like there might be some work with the UBF being discussed, which would then change, you know, who could be at those meetings without causing a problem.
Okay, future items will also include the EBF. We'll come back to this. Are there other future items that people have that they would like to be in January?
I will just add that by the time we get to January, our fiscal year 25 audit will be complete. So, you know, as part of the committee's charge, normally we have the auditors come out and do a brief presentation on the financial results and anything that they found as part of their audit. So we'll include that on the January agenda as well.
Okay, great. Okay, could I get a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Second?
Second.
Okay, all in
I
favor?
know you guys don't want to leave.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, meeting adjourned.
5 seconds after 8:30.